Hello, everyone, and welcome to my webinar today. My name is Rachel, and we're going to be looking at elicitation techniques we can use in the classroom. So in today's session, first of all, we're going to look at what elicitation actually is. After that, we will look at how we can elicit from simple pictures and images. And then we are going to look at using a range of elicitation techniques to elicit vocabulary items. We're going to discuss in a bit more detail why we should elicit from our learners as much as we can within our lessons. We are then going to focus on how we can use elicitation techniques when presenting new grammar structures. Finally, we're going to look at some fun ideas so for games where we can use these elicitation techniques. So let's start by looking at what elicitation means. What is it exactly? Well, elicitation is a range of techniques which enables the teacher to get the students to provide information rather than giving the information. It's used to ask your learners to come up with vocabulary and language forms and rules for language. Also to get them to give you information, for example, brainstorming films or something like that before you do a listening about film or a reading about film. You could brainstorm types of films first of all. So you're eliciting ideas from your students. That's really what it is, rather than you telling your students. Okay, so why do we elicit from our students? Well, collectively, your students have a lot of knowledge, perhaps knowledge of the L2, so the language that they're learning, and certainly knowledge of the real world. This knowledge needs to be activated and used. It's important to remember that the teaching of new knowledge is often based on what your learners already know. When eliciting in the classroom, the teacher is creating a learner-centered environment. It's very important. This is why we elicit, because the students are then participating in the learning process rather than just being on the receiving end of information. Students are a part of that learning process, sharing their ideas, linking the information they already know with the new information coming from the teacher. This makes the process much more memorable. So, how can we elicit from this picture on the slide? Well, let's have a look. Well, the first thing I'll probably do is I'll probably say to students, okay, students, what's happening in this picture? Well, there's friends, miss. Yes, there's friends. Okay, and what are they doing? Are they having a good time? Yes. How do we know? Because they're laughing. Great, because they're laughing. Why do you think they might be laughing? Funny story. Yes, funny story. They might be telling each other a funny story. Does anyone know another word for a funny story? Joke. Well done, Carlos. Yes, joke is another word for a funny story. Brilliant. Okay. So you hope that someone will tell you that it's a joke. But if they don't, it doesn't really matter because you're going to tell them anyway. But they will know from the way that you've introduced and elicited from that picture, funny story, it's a joke, okay? Another word for a funny story is a joke because you've elicited that from them. Then obviously model and drill and ask concept check questions and all of that stuff too. So first of all, you've elicited the word joke, the key word from the picture. Next, you're going to ask concept check questions to check their understanding. So you could say, okay, so is a joke a funny story? Yes. Okay. Is it a sad story? No. Good. Do people laugh at jokes? Yeah. Great. So we've elicited from the picture, a keyword, we've concept check questioned it so that we've asked the CCQs to check they understand it. And then what do we do next? We have to model and drill it to make sure they know how to say it. So, everybody, joke, joke, excellent, okay. Joke, joke, a joke. Yes, we tell a joke, and then model and drill individuals to make sure that students know how to say it. It's really important that meaning and pronunciation come before the form. What is the point in putting up a new word, joke, on the whiteboard? Your students don't know the word. So they're just going to read the word and think, why has teacher put that word up on the board? It means nothing to me. But if you have conveyed the meaning, elicited from picture or mime or whatever to convey the meaning, concept checked it, made sure they understand what it means and how to say it. Finally, when you get to putting it up on the board, the form on the board, your students know it, so the word makes sense to them now. Okay. So you could even elicit at the board. So students, how do you spell joke, do you think? Okay, someone might know. Students want to demonstrate their knowledge and what they know. So try and elicit, even at the board. What kind of word is this, students? Is it an action? No, it's not a verb. Okay, so what is it? It's a noun. Well done. It's a noun. Right up. It's a noun. So you're eliciting even at the board. So that's how we can elicit a simple word from a picture. So in the lesson, when can we elicit? Well, the obvious answer to that question is you can elicit at any single time. And what can you elicit? You can elicit anything from ideas, feelings, meanings of things, situations, and much more. You can elicit to find out what your students already know or don't know. You can move on quickly to the next point, for example, if your students already know something, rather than spending long periods of time teaching them something new that they already know. This saves time in the lesson. So you can elicit at any single point. Let's just say students have finished a task, a reading lesson, and they've just done answered some questions. And during the feedback to get the answers, one of your students comes up with something that was in the lesson yesterday. So they might have mentioned, funny story. So you could say, students, do you remember that word for funny story yesterday? Joke. Well done. Exactly. So you can elicit at any single point that you want to in the lesson during any kind of task. Another one could be, do you remember that word, Pedro, from yesterday? You know, the word that's similar to laugh. When we laugh at something silly, for example. Giggle. Yes. Well done. Yes. Sorry. For some reason, Pedro, I just couldn't remember that word. Thank you very much. Okay. So as you can see, you can elicit at any point during the lesson. So the idea is that really nothing can be elicited without some input from the teacher. The students need the prompts, they need associations, they need reminders. Remember that the objective here really is to allow your students to participate in the learning process and not to be lectured. Okay, so we're going to look in a while, we're going to look at how we can elicit in grammar lessons, and we're also going to look at now how we can elicit when we want to teach our students some new vocabulary. Okay, so let's look at teaching new vocabulary items and how we can elicit from our students. So really the best thing to start with is to say that you must choose the best elicitation technique. So for example, when you're teaching simple action verbs, miming is usually the quickest way to elicit from your students. So for example, talking about your morning routine with the present simple, you could demonstrate the action. So, in the morning what am I doing, students? Waking up, miss. Yes, exactly. I'm waking up. So in the morning, I wake up at 7 o'clock. Then at 7:30, what am I doing? And then elicit brushing your teeth. Exactly. So you can use mime for very simple actions or verbs. Okay. However, it gets much more complicated when you want to elicit from more, perhaps more tricky concepts. So think of the word freedom. Would you mime or would you be able to mime here? No, not really. So you'd have to think about the best way to elicit this idea. So perhaps you could use a picture of a person leaving prison. Okay, it sounds crazy, but you could. You could ask, is this person free? Yes. Okay. If you're in prison, are you free? No. So does anyone know the noun form of free? Freedom. Excellent. Well done, Pedro. Okay. So you're eliciting in ways that make it simpler to convey the meaning. So you wouldn't mime freedom, but you could use a picture and then ask some questions to elicit that word. Okay. So on the slide, you can see I have a lovely picture here. So I could use a picture like this to elicit some vocabulary. So, for example, let's say I'm about to do a listening on the topic of action film. Okay. And I know that some of these words, some of the students may not know, and I need to check if they know some of this vocabulary. So I could, let's say, use this picture to elicit. So I'm going to demonstrate that now. Okay. So I would say, students, who is this? And of course they would say, it's Superman, miss. Great. Okay. So what can he do? And your students might say, well, he can fly. Great. Okay. So what else can he do? Is he strong? Yeah, he's really strong. Great. Is he a normal man? No, miss, he's not normal. No, of course, because he has special powers, doesn't he? So does anyone know another way of saying special powers? Okay. Superpower. Well done. Okay. So, we're eliciting the whole time. We can elicit superpowers just from a simple picture. But we wouldn't be able to stop there because some students wouldn't know still what superpower means. So we'd have to ask what we call concept checking questions, or CCQs for short. So, for example, we could say, if you have a superpower, does this mean that you're normal? No. So is being able to fly, if you're a man, a normal man, a superpower? Yes. Is being really, really strong, if you're really, really strong, is this having a superpower? Yes. So does Superman have superpowers then? Yes. Does Spider-Man have superpowers? And so on. This should be relatively quick. Okay. Just a few questions just to check that they've understood what superpower means. You could even make it a little bit funny by saying, do I have superpowers? Okay. You never know what answers you're going to get for that. Okay. So then, of course, you would need to model and drill because this is new vocabulary. Once you've elicited from the picture, the keyword has been introduced. You then need to ask your CCQs to check the meaning. And then, of course, you would need to make sure your students can say the word. So this is where modeling and drilling comes in. So modeling is when you say the word and drilling is when your students repeat. Make sure that you model and drill the whole class as well as individuals. So for example, you would say superpower, superpower. Your students would then repeat. Go to individuals. Pedro, superpower. Maria, superpower. Make sure your students can say it. And then once you know they understand the word, when we use the word, how to say the word, finally the word goes up on the board. And we call this putting up the form on the board. This doesn't mean elicitation stops at this stage. You can still elicit while you're at the board. So you could say, okay, can anyone tell me what kind of word superpower is? It's a noun. Great. Of course it's a superpower because it's a thing. Of course it's a noun because it's a thing. It's not an action. So you're listing the whole time. You could even say to students at this stage, okay, how many syllables does this word have? Superpower. Superpower, where's the stress? Superpower. The stress is on the first syllable. Excellent, students. So you're eliciting even when you're at the board. Okay. Of course, if you were doing a listening and you found more than 5 new vocabulary items that you think your students may not know, then you're probably actually using a text that's at the wrong level. So you would then need to go and find something that's more suitable. But maybe 5 words is fine to try and elicit from your students when you're doing a listening or a reading. Okay, so the staging. So the first thing you would do is convey meaning. So mime, in this case, I used a picture. Realia, now realia is, you could use something that's real. So for example, a phone. This is a real life object, a phone, a pen. So we call this realia. Okay. So mime, picture, or just bring the item into the class. After you've conveyed the meaning, you elicit the word. So as I did with superpower. Is he a normal man? No. He can fly. Great. So we can say he has a superpower. So I'm eliciting, and then if the students don't know the word, I then just say the word myself, superpower. I then concept check the meaning, as I did before. So if you can fly and you're a man, do you have a superpower? Yeah, great. Then provide the clear oral model, superpower, get your students to repeat, and then finally put it up on the board, eliciting as much as you can. So this is how we would elicit when teaching new vocabulary items. So let's move on. As I said before, the elicitation technique that you need or choose to use must be the right elicitation technique for the item you're teaching. So let's think about a phrase. Okay, how could we elicit a phrase from our students? This is a bit trickier. So let's imagine I can show a picture of a very simple picture of someone, just a simple circle with an unhappy face. And I could say, okay, this is my friend. Does anyone want to give him a name? Jack. Great. It's a great name. Okay. Yeah. So this is Jack. His face is unhappy. It's very simple drawing, just a little unhappy face. And I could say, okay, yeah, how is Jack feeling? He's unhappy. Yeah, he's unhappy. Can anyone think of another word for unhappy? Sad. Brilliant. Yeah, great. Another one maybe? Miserable. Yes, great. So this is how Jack is feeling. Okay, what's the opposite of up? Down. Brilliant. What's the opposite of out? In. Brilliant. And where does your rubbish go when the bin men come and collect it? They take it to the dump. Well done, students. Yes. So we can say that Jack is down in the dumps. He's down in the dumps. So if you're down in the dumps, look at the picture of Jack. Are you happy? No. If you're down in the dumps, are you unhappy? Yes. Are you sad? Yes. So Jack is down in the dumps. Of course, then you've asked your CCQs, you then model and drill, and then put it up on the board. So this time I didn't use a picture. This time I didn't really use mime. I used a very simple picture, but I also used something else. So what I used was synonyms and antonyms to extract the individual words in the phrase. Okay. So as we've discussed, you can also use visuals. You can use mime, like for simple action verbs. What am I doing? I'm brushing my teeth. And we can use realia. Gestures. Now, this is a tricky one. Now, some gestures that we use on a daily basis, they're okay for us, but you must make sure they're culturally appropriate for where you're teaching. So, for example, this. Okay, we know that this is a positive sign. But in some cultures, this is not very, let's just say it's not very pleasant. So you have to check before you use gestures in the classroom just to make sure that they are culturally appropriate. Okay, because I could say, okay, so is this a positive word? Yes, and that's great. But in some cultures, that would not be appropriate. Okay, another technique we can use is sounds like. So think back to that word that we looked at before. Okay, let's look at joke, for example. So we established that a joke is a funny story. But if you just wanted to, elicit that word from your students one day, you could go, do you remember that word? It's a funny story. It's another word for a funny story, but it sounds like smoke. What is that word? Joke. Well done, Carlos. Yes. Okay, so we can use the sounds like as well. We can also just pretend that we don't know. We could say, oh my goodness, this morning I woke up and I really couldn't remember that word that we looked at yesterday, students. So do you remember that word for laughing? But we laugh at something silly. What is it again? Giggle. Yes. Well done. Okay. I really couldn't remember this morning. Thank you so much. Okay. Students want to know that, they want to show you what they know. This is the essential part. Students don't want to be lectured. They want to be a part of the learning process, and they want to demonstrate to you what they already know or what they have acquired. So we're now going to go on to how we can elicit in grammar lessons. So let's imagine that I'm going to be introducing a new structure, and it is used to. Okay. How can I introduce this from the beginning, or how can I elicit this from the beginning? Well, we always do a lead-in. So, for example, the lead-in could be, okay, guys, in the past, I was a singer. I'm not a singer anymore. Okay, so in the past, I was a singer. I'm not a singer anymore. In pairs, can you talk about something that was true for you in the past that is not true anymore? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. Off you go. So your students would have a little chat about something that was true in the past but isn't true now. Now, if some of your students already know this structure, used to, for sure they're going to be using this now in this activity. And you'll be listening in, obviously, into seeing who actually does use it. Then when you come back to get the feedback, if nobody uses it, it doesn't really matter. But at least you've got your students to start thinking about when we use this structure to talk about things that were true in the past that are no longer true. Okay, so once we've done the lead-in, we can then look at the structure in more detail. And I would probably use pictures if I can to elicit a story, to set the context really for how I'm going to teach this structure. So we've got them thinking about, the context of when we use it. You could then elicit ideas from this picture. So let's start. So this is someone I know. Does anyone want to give me his name? Does anyone want to guess his name? Pedro, brilliant. Okay, we'll call him Pedro. Great. Okay, so you're listing right from the beginning, getting your students involved to create the story. Great. So thank you. Yes, this is Pedro. Lovely name. Okay, so what can you tell me from this picture about Pedro's life? Anybody? He is rich. Yes, he's rich. How do we know he's rich? Because he has loads of money. Yes, of course, he has lots of money. Brilliant. Okay, so we can say that Pedro is rich. Okay, what about this? What can you tell me about Pedro's life from this picture? Where does he live? He lives in a big house. Brilliant. Okay, can anyone tell us another word maybe for big house? Mansion. Brilliant. Well done. Yes, so Pedro lives in a mansion. Great. Okay. What I didn't tell you, though, students, is that this was Pedro's life 10 years ago. Okay. Do you want to see Pedro's life now? And then you could show them the picture of where Pedro is now. Okay. So this is Pedro's life now. So elicit from your students. So students, where is Pedro now? He's in prison. Yes, he's in prison. Okay. So does Pedro live in a big mansion house now? No. Is Pedro rich now? No. Okay. So we can say that Pedro used to be rich. Okay. We can say that Pedro used to live in a mansion. So we're eliciting all the time, asking questions from our students. So we could say, is Pedro rich now? No, teacher. Pedro used to be rich. Great. So, you're trying to get your students to actually say the target language. You're trying to elicit that target language from them. So after you've elicited enough example sentences about Pedro's life, you obviously then need to concept check when we use used to, just to make sure. So you could say, okay, then students. So do we use used to talk about things that were true in the past, but that are not true now? And of course, yes, teacher, we use used to talk about things that were true in the past that aren't true now. Great. At this stage, you could even refer back to the lead-in. Let's say that Michelle said that in the past he smoked, but he doesn't smoke anymore, to his partner in the beginning, in the lead-in. You could go back and say, so, Michelle, does he smoke now? No, teacher. Hopefully they will then say, he used to smoke. Brilliant, because they've understood the whole concept. So you're personalizing it as well by going back to the lead-in. So once you're pretty clear that your students are sure when we use the function of the target language, you then, of course, need to model and drill again. Okay, so the full sentences, you need the question form, the positive form, and the negative form, because your students need to know all of those. So did he used to be in prison? No, he didn't used to be in prison. Okay. He used to be rich. So we're obviously modeling and drilling the question, the negative, and the positive form. So your students are repeating all of those forms. You could even ask a few more CCQs at this stage. Michelle, again, what can we say about something about Michelle? He used to smoke, miss. Great. Okay. Just to double check, does this mean then that he was smoked in the past? Yes. Does he smoke now? No. So do we use used to talk about something true in the past that isn't true anymore? Yes. So when we're absolutely sure, we then model and drill, CCQ again if you want, and then finally you must elicit again the form to go up on the board. Now, as I said before, Just because you're at the board writing up doesn't mean you can't elicit still at this stage. You can elicit from your students the entire sentences that you got them to model and drill. So you could say, what was the question I asked you again, students? Okay, put up the question mark. And hopefully they will, if they've modeled and drilled enough of this target language, they should be able to tell you. Did he used to be in prison? Great. And you write it up. What was the positive sentence again, students? He used to live in a mansion. Great. So you're listing all the while. You really want to also just make sure that they're aware of each of those individual parts of the sentence and what they really are. So what is that, students? It's the subject. Yes, great. It's the subject. Okay. So you're listing all the different parts of the sentence as well. Where is the verb? Used to. Great. This is the structure. Brilliant. So you're listing all the way through, even at the board. So you can see how we can use pictures to elicit a story in which we teach the target language in grammar lessons, and refer back to our lead-in to personalize the target language too. Just to recap, this is what we would do in a grammar lesson. After the lead-in, we would use a picture or a mime or any of the techniques that we think would be the best way to establish the meaning and the context. Then elicit from your learners ideas. Once you have enough ideas, you then elicit the function of this target language. Is this true in the past? Was this true in the past? Yes. Is it true now? No. So do we use used to talk about things true in the past that aren't true now? Yes. Okay. All of that stuff. Model and drill, the whole class and individuals, very important. And then finally, elicit when we're at the board, elicit the form. Elicitation is something that definitely gets better. The one thing I would say to new teachers is you must get up and give it a go, because you will not improve your elicitation skills if you do not try and keep trying. I actually find it quite easy to elicit now, and actually it's become probably my preferred teaching style. I probably elicit more than anything else, and this is because I'm so used to it. So I would say don't be afraid of it. Practice it, and practice it again until you feel comfortable, because you will find eventually it makes your lesson planning, it makes your delivery in lessons much easier to understand, and it actually makes it more fun. Let's look at how we can use elicitation techniques when playing games with our students. We want to make it fun, right? So the first one I have is Pictionary. This works really well in pairs. So one student could be given a card with an item on that they have learned this week. So, for example, they could have something like superpower. Okay. And what they have to do is they have to draw superpower, and the other person would have to guess the word. So they could draw a picture of Superman and Spider-Man. Okay. They could give a clue like, okay, this is not something that everyone has, okay? And the other person has to guess the word superpower. Another one, I'm sure we've all played this before, hangman. So the teacher has a word or a phrase that has come up in that week, and they want to elicit it from their students. Every dash that you put on the board, of course, is representative of a single letter of that word or phrase. So let's say we had, the word joke on the board, 4 letters, 4 dashes, and you're listing from the students' letters. I always find it's better with bigger classes to get students to put their hands up rather than just getting them to shout out. But with smaller classes, surely, for sure, you can get students to shout out letters. Once the letters are filled in, the student can guess it, they can shout it out, or they can put their hand up to guess. Is joke miss? Great. Okay, so they have won, they get a point. Then they can come up to the board and they can think of a word or phrase from the week, and they can elicit from their classmates what that word is. Okay. Give us a clue. This is another really fun game. Now, the thing about give us a clue is you need to establish the rules before you play. I'm sure you've all played this at Christmas with your families, where you have to guess the name of a film or a book. So you can do something very similar with your students. So you could say, okay, this is, you can mime it. So it's a song. You have to say how many words it is by holding up your fingers. Okay. How many syllables there are by touching your arm. There are 2 syllables. They can say it's a noun or it's a verb or it's an adjective. So they can use all of these elicitation techniques to get their classmates to guess what's written on the card that's provided by you. Another one is quite similar to give us a clue, but this can be done in groups. It makes it more fun. So you could give learners a set of clues in groups and they have to write down the answer. For example, it could be something like, this is a fruit, but everyone thinks it's a vegetable. What is it? And of course, the answer is tomato. So they'd be writing down tomato. So you have this set of clues, they write down the answers, discuss it in groups, write down the answers. And at the end, the group with the most correct answers wins. Okay. Using parts of speech. Now, this is an interesting one. It's usually, I use it probably more with slightly higher level learners. So, for example, again, in groups, you could give out, in front of the class, give out a word. So you could say, okay, guys, the first word, it's the noun form of communicate, the noun form of communicate. And they would write down, of course, communication. So you could do it that way. And of course, then at the end, tally up who has the most correct answers. They're the winning team. And give them prizes, of course, always give them prizes, okay? Doesn't matter how old they are. They want sweets or something. Okay, and then the last couple of ones, board race. This is one of those staple teacher activities, staple TEFL teacher activities. It's used by everyone. I like to use a board race first thing in the morning to get my students up out of the seats, to get them ready for my lesson. So let's say I want to review some vocabulary about the weather. So I would get 2 teams, usually works better with 2 teams, team A, team B. They both line up in front of the whiteboard. The first person in the line is given a board marker. So make sure you always give and check instructions before they start the task. Very important. So give them the instructions. Each person will run up, write up 1 item at a time connected to a topic of the weather. Okay, we studied this last week. You should have a good understanding and remember all of these words, right? So they come up, write up the words, and then pass the pen to the person behind them, and then go back to the end of the line. The next person will then come up, write a different word connected to weather, and then run back to the end of the line. They have 2 minutes to do this. Instruction check by asking how many items at a time do you write on the board when you come to the board? 1, excellent. And then you pass the pen back? Yes, great. How long do you have to do this? 2 minutes, brilliant. Okay, so you're listing the rules from your learners. And then you play the game. They have 2 minutes, they run up, it gets very energetic, and they love it. And it's a really good way of getting your students up out of their seats first thing in the morning. The winning team, of course, is the team with the most correctly spelt answers connected to the topic of weather on the board. And we have back to the board. This is a great activity. Again, make sure that you go through the rules with your students before playing, especially if you have a big rowdy class. So the idea is one student will sit with their back to the board on a chair, and the rest of the classmates can see the word on the board, but the person sitting in the chair cannot. The teacher would write a word or phrase that has come up in the lesson recently on the board. The rest of the class have to try and get the person in the chair to say the word that's on the board. So students could say, it sounds like. They could use all those elicitation techniques. It sounds like, it's a noun, it's a verb, it's an adjective. They could try and describe what the word is. It's when you tell a funny story. Joke, brilliant, okay. So they're trying to elicit the word from the person sitting in the chair. Once they've actually guessed it, that person in the chair has the power to choose someone from the class to come and sit in that chair. So it's quite good fun. It's a really good way of using the elicitation techniques and getting your students to use them. That's a good question, actually. I think the reluctance probably just comes from what they're used to. Perhaps they come from a culture where like Chinese culture, for example, students are, they're lined up, lots of students in one class, rows of desks. The teacher is just tells them stuff, they just write it down. They're listening, they're passive learning. And because of this reason, sometimes when you then get those students in your classroom, they struggle very much at the beginning. But it's only because of what they're used to, because of the style they're used to. The more they get used to the new style, the better. And the more they will actually start to enjoy the lessons more. And I really hope that you've learned something new. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.